Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that started as Victorian medicine and ended up as a Friday night ritual in nightclubs from Berlin to Bangkok. We're talking about poppers, those tiny bottles with the big rush that somehow travelled from heart patients' prescription pads to sweaty dance floors worldwide. Not the candy, not the party favours your kid's teacher sends home, the other kind, the kind that makes your heart race, your head spin, and your inhibitions evaporate faster than the liquid inside. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. A huge thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. Your curiosity about the weirdest corners of pharmaceutical history is what keeps this channel going. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Somehow, it's always 2 a.m. somewhere, and someone's always Googling things they probably shouldn't. Oh, and by the way, we're now live on Spotify. You can find the link in the description if you want to take these strange historical journeys on the go. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe hide your browser history, because this one's going to raise some eyebrows. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how a medicine designed to stop chest pain during the reign of Queen Victoria ended up being sniffed in club bathrooms? How did respectable pharmacists in the 1860s accidentally invent the party drug that wouldn't peak until Studio 54? What did people think they were buying when they first unscrewed that cap? Did anyone predict that cardiologists' cure for angina would become synonymous with disco, leather bars, and very questionable life choices? Could you survive one night in a 1970s nightclub where everyone's passing around a bottle of something that smells like dirty gym socks mixed with nail polish remover? Would you last 5 minutes on a dance floor where the DJ, the bartender, and half the crowd are huffing chemicals that were literally designed to dilate blood vessels? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in 1867. You're a chemist in Victorian England. You have no idea what you're about to unleash. You're wearing a waistcoat, mutton chops are in fashion, and you're about to accidentally invent the future of nightlife. Good luck. Let's start with where it all began, because poppers weren't invented by some rogue chemist in a basement trying to get high. They were invented by very serious Victorian scientists trying to save lives. In 1867, a French chemist named Antoine Jérôme Ballard synthesized amyl nitrite, a yellowish, highly volatile liquid that smelled absolutely terrible. He wasn't trying to create a party drug. He was experimenting with nitrites, a family of chemicals that had interesting effects on the human body. But it was a Scottish physician named Sir Thomas Lauder Brunton who figured out what this stinking liquid could actually do. He discovered that when inhaled, amyl nitrite caused blood vessels to dilate rapidly, which meant it could relieve the crushing chest pain of angina pectoris, a condition that, back then, could kill you in minutes. Suddenly, this foul-smelling chemical became a lifesaver, prescribed to heart patients across Europe and America. Doctors would hand out tiny glass ampules wrapped in cloth that you'd crush between your fingers, hence the name poppers, and inhale deeply. It was fast, effective, and revolutionary. Unfortunately, it was also about to take the strangest detour in pharmaceutical history. Picture this: you're a Victorian doctor, complete with mutton chops and a waistcoat that probably hasn't been cleaned since the Crimean War. You're standing in your surgery, which smells like carbolic acid and desperation, when a patient stumbles in clutching his chest. His face is grey. He's sweating through his collar. He's convinced he's about to die, and honestly, he might be right. Angina was no joke in the 1860s. It was a death sentence delivered in waves of crushing chest pain that felt like an elephant sitting on your sternum. You reach into your medical bag and pull out a tiny glass ampule, no bigger than your pinky finger. It's wrapped in woven fabric because the glass is thin, fragile, meant to be snapped. You hand it to the patient and tell him to break it between his fingers and breathe deeply. He looks at you like you've lost your mind. This is medicine. breaking glass and are inhaling mystery chemicals. But he's desperate, so he does it. The ampule cracks with a soft pop. The smell hits immediately sharp, chemical, like someone mixed paint thinner with old gymnasium equipment. The patient winces but inhales, and within seconds something miraculous happens. The pain eases, his face regains colour, his breathing steadies. He's not going to die today. This was the magic of amyl nitrite. It worked fast, faster than anything else available at the time. Nitroglycerin existed, sure, but amyl nitrite was quicker, more portable, and didn't require precise dosing. You could carry these little ampules in your pocket, crack one open when your heart started doing its best impression of a dying accordion, and be back to normal within minutes. For heart patients, it was nothing short of revolutionary. Doctors prescribed them enthusiastically. Pharmacies stocked them. Medical journals published glowing reports about this miracle drug that could snatch people back from death's doorstep. But here's the thing about chemicals that make your blood vessels dilate. They don't discriminate about which blood vessels they're dilating. Your heart gets relief, sure, but so does everything else. Your face flushes red. Your head feels light, almost floaty. Your entire body tingles with a warm, rushing sensation that's not entirely unpleasant. In fact, it's kind of nice. Really nice. And some patients started to notice. The Victorian medical establishment, ever so proper and deeply committed to ignoring anything remotely pleasurable about the human body, tried not to think too hard about these secondary effects. But word spread anyway. Because when you give thousands of people access to a chemical that makes them feel euphoric, even if only for a few minutes, some of them are going to start using it for reasons that have nothing to do with chest pain. And that's exactly what happened. The genie was out of the bottle, literally. And it would take another 100 years before anyone realised just how far that genie would travel. From Victorian sick rooms to disco dance floors, from respectable medicine to the wildest nightclubs on earth. All because a Scottish doctor wanted to save some lives and accidentally created the future of Friday nights. Here's the thing about Victorian England: they were obsessed with health, but they were also deeply, deeply weird about bodies. Amyl nitrite was a legitimate medical marvel, prescribed by respectable physicians to respectable patients. But almost immediately, whispers started circulating about its other effects. Because while amyl nitrite was stopping heart attacks, it was also doing something else, something that made prudish Victorians very uncomfortable. Users reported feeling flushed, lightheaded, and euphoric. Their hearts raced, their skin tingled, and, well, certain other parts of their anatomy became more sensitive. Blood flow, it turns out, doesn't discriminate. It goes everywhere, including places that made Victorian doctors cough nervously and change the subject. Some physicians began quietly noting that amyl nitrite had aphrodisiac properties, though they buried these observations in the footnotes of medical journals, written in Latin so the general public wouldn't understand. But people talked, patients whispered to friends, and slowly, very slowly, amyl nitrite started showing up in places it wasn't supposed to, like bedrooms, brothels, and eventually underground parties where people were experimenting with all kinds of substances Queen Victoria would not have approved of. You're a respectable Victorian gentleman, let's call you Charles, and you've just been prescribed amyl nitrite for your heart condition. Your physician, a stern man with impressive sideburns and zero sense of humour, has explained that you must carry these ampules at all times in case of an attack. You nod seriously, pocket the cloth-wrapped glass vials, and head home feeling grateful that modern medicine has advanced so far. That evening, curiosity gets the better of you. You're feeling fine, no chest pain, no breathlessness, but you wonder what the medicine actually feels like. So you crack open an ampule in your study, away from your wife's judgmental gaze, and take a cautious sniff. The rush hits you like a locomotive. Your face goes scarlet. Your collar suddenly feels too tight. The room tilts slightly, not unpleasantly, and you have to sit down in your leather chair because your knees have decided they're on vacation. Your heart pounds, which, given that you have a heart condition, seems counterintuitive and mildly alarming. But there's also this wave of warmth spreading through your entire body. Everything feels heightened. The gaslight seems brighter. The sound of the clock ticking sounds profound. And you notice, with some embarrassment, that certain parts of your anatomy are responding with what can only be described as enthusiasm. This is precisely what Victorian doctors were desperately trying not to discuss in polite company. Because amyl nitrite didn't just relieve chest pain, it caused vasodilation everywhere. Every blood vessel in your body relaxed and expanded, which meant increased blood flow to, well, everywhere. Modern users would call this a body high. Victorians called it concerning side effects and tried to pretend it wasn't happening. But patients weren't stupid. Word spread through social networks, gentlemen's clubs, parlours, dinner parties. Someone would mention, casually, that amyl nitrite had certain interesting properties beyond its cardiac applications. Eyes would widen. Knowing glances would be exchanged, and suddenly, people who'd never had a day of chest pain in their lives were developing mysterious heart conditions that required regular prescriptions. Pharmacists started noticing patterns. Certain customers returned for refills far more frequently than their diagnosis would suggest. Young, healthy men claimed to need monthly supplies of a medication typically reserved for elderly patients with severe angina. One London pharmacist reportedly kept a ledger, noting which customers he suspected were using amyl nitrite recreationally, though he never used that exact word because recreational drug use wasn't really a concept yet. These were just people with unusually frequent heart episodes. Sure, the medical establishment was in a bind. On one hand, amyl nitrite was genuinely life-saving. Denying it to patients who needed it would be unethical. On the other hand, its misuse was becoming an open secret, and Victorian society was nothing if not obsessed with maintaining appearances. Doctors began writing carefully worded warnings in medical journals, advising colleagues to prescribe with caution and monitor patient usage closely. They discussed, in the most euphemistic language imaginable, the stimulating effects that some patients reported. What they couldn't discuss openly, because Victorian sensibilities wouldn't allow it, was sex. Amyl nitrite enhanced sexual experiences, made them more intense, more pleasurable, more uninhibited. For a society that could barely acknowledge that sex existed at all, this was catastrophically awkward. So they buried it in footnotes, wrote about it in Latin, and hoped no one would notice. But people noticed. And they kept noticing for the next 150 years. Because once you discover a chemical that makes everything feel better, you don't just forget about it because a doctor in a top hat told you it was only for emergencies. You remember, you experiment, and eventually you pass that knowledge on to the next generation, who passes it to the next, until amyl nitrite travels all the way from Victorian sick rooms to Studio 54, carried forward by one unshakable truth. People like to feel good, and they're remarkably creative about finding ways to do it. The Victorians tried to keep this particular genie in the bottle. They failed spectacularly. By the early 1900s, amyl nitrite was still primarily a heart medication, but it had also developed a quiet reputation as something more. In the shadowy corners of bohemian Paris, in the back rooms of Berlin's avant-garde clubs, and in the speakeasies of Prohibition-era America, amyl nitrite started making appearances. Artists, writers and musicians, people who lived on the fringes of society, began experimenting with it. They liked the rush, the brief intense high, and the way it made music sound sharper, colours brighter, and inhibitions melt away. It wasn't widespread yet. It wasn't a cultural phenomenon. But it was there, quietly bubbling under the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. And that moment wouldn't come for another 50 years, when the sexual revolution, the rise of disco, and a very specific community would turn this obscure heart medication into a symbol of liberation, hedonism, and nightlife itself. Imagine you're in Paris in 1923, standing in a smoky cafe in Montparnasse, where the air tastes like absinthe and cigarettes, and everyone's arguing about Dadaism. You're wearing clothes you probably stole from someone else's wardrobe, you haven't slept in 30 hours, and you're pretty sure the person sitting next to you is either a genius or completely unhinged, possibly both. This is where artists, poets, and revolutionaries gather to drink cheap wine, debate the meaning of existence, and occasionally experiment with substances that weren't technically illegal yet, because no one had thought to make them illegal. Someone passes you a small glass ampule wrapped in cloth. Try this, they say in French-accented English, or possibly English-accented French, it's hard to tell at this hour. It's medicine for the heart. You recognize the description amyl nitrite. You've heard whispers about it, how it makes everything feel more intense, more real, more present. So you crack it open, inhale, and suddenly Picasso's latest painting on the wall makes perfect sense. The angular faces, the fractured perspectives, of course. That's exactly what reality looks like when your blood vessels are expanding at the speed of thought. This is how amyl nitrite entered the underground. Not through wild parties or massive distribution networks, but through small, intimate gatherings of people who lived outside mainstream society's rules. The bohemians of Paris weren't looking to get wasted. They were looking to feel more, to experience art and life and each other with greater intensity. Amyl nitrite, with its brief rush and lack of lingering intoxication, fit perfectly into their aesthetic. It was a quick hit of heightened perception that didn't interfere with their ability to work, create, or argue about whether capitalism was destroying the human soul. Berlin in the 1920s and 30s was even more experimental. The city was a playground for every form of transgression imaginable. Cabaret shows that would make your grandmother faint. Clubs where gender was a costume you changed like hats. Parties where the line between art and life dissolved entirely. Amyl nitrite circulated through these spaces like a secret handshake, a way to mark yourself as someone who understood that pleasure wasn't something to be ashamed of, but something to be pursued, celebrated, and shared. The Weimar-era clubs didn't advertise that they had amyl nitrite, but everyone knew. You'd see it in private rooms, passed between lovers, used before performances to intensify the experience. Dancers reported that it made their movements feel more fluid, more connected to the music. Musicians said it helped them lose themselves in the rhythm, stop thinking, and just play. And for people exploring their sexuality in a city that was remarkably open compared to the rest of Europe, amyl nitrite became a tool for lowering inhibitions and enhancing intimacy. Then you cross the Atlantic to Prohibition-era America, where everything fun is illegal, but somehow more accessible than ever. Speakeasies are serving bathtub gin that could blind you. Jazz musicians are creating entirely new forms of music, and underneath it all is a thriving market for substances that help people forget, for a few hours, that the economy has collapsed and the world is heading toward another war. Amyl nitrite shows up here too, though it's still relatively rare. It's expensive, harder to smuggle than alcohol, and most people prefer substances that last longer than 3 minutes. But in certain circles, particularly among gay men who are starting to form communities in cities like New York and San Francisco, amyl nitrite finds a dedicated audience. These are men who can't live openly, who meet in secret, who've learned to communicate in codes and glances. For them, amyl nitrite is more than just a drug. It's a symbol of a hidden world where they can be themselves, even if only briefly. even if only in the dark. The underground use of amyl nitrite during this period established patterns that would explode decades later. It became associated with artistic communities, with sexual freedom, with spaces that rejected mainstream values. It was never mainstream itself, never popular in the way alcohol or tobacco were, but it had staying power. It persisted through decades, passed from one generation of outsiders to the next, waiting for the cultural moment when it would finally step into the light. Or at least into the strobe lights of a disco ball. Let's talk science for a second, because understanding what poppers actually do to your body is key to understanding why they became so popular. Amyl nitrite and its chemical cousins butyl nitrite and isobutyl nitrite are alkyl nitrites, organic compounds that belong to a class of chemicals called vasodilators. When you inhale them, they're absorbed almost instantly through the lungs into your bloodstream. Within seconds, they cause your blood vessels to relax and expand. This sudden dilation drops your blood pressure, which is why they work for angina. But that's not all. The rush of blood also triggers the release of dopamine and adrenaline, giving you that immediate head-spinning euphoria. Your heart pounds, your skin flushes, you feel warm, tingly, and weirdly invincible for about 2 to 5 minutes. Then it's over. The high is intense but incredibly short-lived, which is both its appeal and its danger. You're chasing a feeling that vanishes almost as quickly as it arrives, and because the effects wear off so fast, people tend to use them repeatedly, which is where things start getting complicated. You're standing on a dance floor, let's say it's 2 a.m, the music is pounding, and you've been dancing for hours. Someone hands you a small brown bottle. You've never tried poppers before, but you've heard about them, and honestly, why not? You're already sweating through your shirt, your ears are ringing from the bass, and you're surrounded by strangers who all seem to be having the time of their lives. So you unscrew the cap, hold the bottle just under your nose, and inhale. The first thing you notice is the smell, like someone mixed nail polish remover with the inside of a high school locker room. It's sharp, chemical, aggressive. Your nose hairs recoil in protest. But you've committed now, so you take a second sniff, deeper this time, and then chemistry takes over. Within 5 seconds, literally 5 seconds, the nitrite molecules have travelled from your nasal passages into your lungs, crossed the thin membrane separating your lungs from your bloodstream, and begun their work. They interact with smooth muscle tissue in your blood vessels, causing a cascade of molecular events that result in rapid vasodilation. Your arteries and veins relax and expand. Blood that was previously moving through narrow channels suddenly has highways to travel on. Your blood pressure drops. Not gradually, not gently, but fast, like someone just opened a pressure valve. Your body, sensing this sudden change, panics slightly and compensates by increasing your heart rate. Now your heart is pounding, racing to move blood through these newly expanded vessels. You can feel it in your chest, in your neck, in your temples. It's not painful exactly, but it's intense. You're hyper-aware of your own cardiovascular system in a way you've never been before. The increased blood flow reaches your brain, delivering a surge of oxygen. This triggers the release of neurotransmitters, dopamine, the pleasure chemical, and norepinephrine, which is basically adrenaline's more sophisticated cousin. Together they create that euphoric rush that makes you throw your hands in the air and forget for exactly 90 seconds that you have work in the morning and your rent is overdue. Your face flushes red. You can feel the heat spreading across your cheeks, down your neck, across your chest. Your skin tingles, almost itches, as capillaries near the surface expand. If you're wearing a tight collar, it suddenly feels suffocating. Your clothes feel too warm, too restrictive. You want to move, to dance, to do something with this surge of energy that's flooding your system. The music that was already loud now sounds impossibly clear. Every beat hits differently. The bass resonates in your chest cavity like you've become a human subwoofer. Lights seem brighter, more vivid. If there's a disco ball or strobe lights, you might actually believe you've achieved enlightenment. The person dancing next to you suddenly seems like the most interesting human being on the planet. You want to hug them, talk to them, tell them things you've never told anyone, though you probably won't, because you also can't really form coherent sentences at the moment. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it fades. Your blood vessels begin to constrict back to normal. Your blood pressure stabilizes. Your heart rate slows. The euphoria drains away like water down a sink, leaving you standing in exactly the same place you were 3 minutes ago, except now you're slightly dizzy and there's a faint pressure building behind your eyes that might, in about 20 minutes, turn into a headache that makes you regret every life decision that led to this moment. But here's the thing, those 3 minutes felt amazing, and your brain, that dopamine-hungry organ that's been steering your terrible decisions since birth, immediately starts suggesting that maybe, just maybe, you should do it again. After all, the bottle's still in your hand. The night is young. The music's still playing. And what's one more hit? This is the chemistry of poppers. Fast, intense, fleeting, and endlessly tempting. It's not a drug that gently massages your brain into a different state. It's a drug that grabs your cardiovascular system by the throat and shakes it vigorously for 3 minutes before letting go. It's less like getting high and more like being briefly possessed by the ghost of someone who really, really loved dancing. And the fact that it's over so quickly is precisely why people keep coming back. You're not chasing the high exactly. You're chasing the memory of the high, trying to recreate those perfect 90 seconds when everything felt right. It never quite does, but that doesn't stop anyone from trying. Fast forward to the 1970s, and the world is exploding with colour, sound and freedom. Disco is dominating the airwaves. Studio 54 has opened its doors in New York City, and suddenly everyone wants to dance until dawn in glittering sweat-soaked clubs where the music never stops and the dress code is whatever makes you feel fabulous. This is the era of liberation, sexual, social and chemical, and poppers fit perfectly into this moment. They were fast, they were fun, and most importantly they were legal. Unlike cocaine, LSD or marijuana, amyl nitrite was still technically a prescription drug, which meant it existed in a legal grey area. You could buy it if you knew where to look, and plenty of people did. In gay clubs especially, poppers became ubiquitous. They enhanced the experience of dancing, heightened physical sensations, and created a shared ritual. Passing around a little brown bottle on the dance floor became as common as sharing a cigarette or a knowing glance. Poppers weren't just a drug. They were part of the culture, the soundtrack, the vibe. And as disco evolved into house music, and house music spread across the globe, poppers went with it. You're walking down a New York City street in 1976. The city is bankrupt, the subway is covered in graffiti, and crime statistics suggest you should probably be somewhere else. But you're not going somewhere else. You're going to the club, not just any club, but the club, the one everyone's talking about, where celebrities and nobodies dance side by side and the door policy is simultaneously rigid and completely arbitrary. You might get in, you might not. That's part of the thrill. Inside, the bass is so loud you feel it in your teeth. The dance floor is packed with bodies moving in synchronized chaos, sequins catching the light, platform shoes that could double as weapons, hair styled into geometric sculptures that defy both gravity and good sense. Everyone's beautiful in that particular way that only happens at 2 a.m, when the lights are low and the music is loud enough to drown out self-doubt. Someone near you pulls out a small brown bottle. They don't hide it. There's no shame. no furtiveness. They unscrew the cap, take a hit, and pass it to the person next to them, who passes it to you. You hesitate for exactly 1 second before bringing it to your nose and inhaling. The rush hits like always, but somehow it's different here. The music syncs with your heartbeat. The lights kaleidoscope across your vision. The crowd becomes a single organism, and you're part of it, moving together, breathing together, existing in this perfect moment that feels infinite, even though you know it'll be over by sunrise. This is what the 1970s did to poppers. It took them from underground curiosity to cultural phenomenon. Disco created the perfect environment for poppers to thrive. The music was repetitive, hypnotic, designed for extended dance sessions that could last 6, 8, 10 hours. Poppers complemented this perfectly. Unlike alcohol, which made you sloppy, or cocaine, which made you aggressive and paranoid, poppers enhanced the experience without overwhelming it. They made the music better. They made dancing feel effortless. They made strangers feel like family. Gay clubs in particular embraced poppers with an intensity that would define their cultural identity for decades. These weren't just party drugs. They were symbols of liberation. The Stonewall riots had happened in '69. The gay rights movement was building momentum. For the first time, gay men could gather in public spaces without as much fear of police raids or violence. And in those spaces, poppers became part of the ritual, a way of saying we're here, we're queer, and we're going to have the best damn time possible. The names of clubs from this era read like a fever dream: The Saint, Flamingo, Paradise Garage, The Loft. These weren't just venues, they were temples dedicated to the religion of dancing. DJs like Larry Levan and Frankie Knuckles understood the chemistry of the dance floor, knew exactly when to build, when to drop, when to let the crowd breathe. And they knew about poppers. They could see the little bottles being passed around, could watch the crowd surge with renewed energy as the hits took effect. Some DJs even timed their sets around it, building to peaks that coincided with the peak of a popper rush. The legal status helped too. Because poppers weren't technically illegal, you could carry them openly. You could pass them around without fear of arrest. Police might shut down a club for drugs, but they weren't raiding places over amyl nitrite. This gave poppers an advantage over other substances. They existed in the light, not the shadows. Record stores started selling them at the counter right next to disco singles. Adult bookstores stocked them openly. Some clubs even sold them at the bar, though they were careful about the labelling. Always room deodorizer or liquid incense, never the thing you sniff to make disco feel transcendent. The 1970s transformed poppers from a medical oddity into an essential accessory of nightlife. By the end of the decade, if you were in a club and someone offered you a hit, you didn't need to ask what it was, you already knew. And so did everyone else on that sweaty, glorious, never-ending dance floor. To understand poppers' place in nightclub history, you have to understand their deep connection to LGBTQ+ culture, particularly in the gay community. In the 1970s and 80s, being openly gay was still dangerous, often illegal, and deeply stigmatized. Gay bars and clubs weren't just places to dance, they were sanctuaries, spaces where people could be themselves without fear. And in those spaces, poppers became more than just a party drug. They became a symbol of freedom, pleasure, and defiance. Poppers enhanced intimacy, lowered inhibitions, and made physical experiences more intense, which made them particularly popular in the gay community. But beyond the physical effects, there was something subversive about them. Here was a substance that had been created by the straight medical establishment, and queer people had reclaimed it, transformed it, and made it their own. It was a small act of rebellion, a middle finger to respectability and shame. Of course, this also meant that when the AIDS crisis hit in the 1980s, poppers became unfairly stigmatized and blamed by homophobic politicians and media outlets looking for scapegoats. But the gay community never abandoned them. Poppers remained a fixture of club culture, a tiny bottle of liquid that represented joy, pleasure and resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy. You're in a gay bar in San Francisco in 1978. Outside, you have to be careful, hold your partner's hand, and you might get harassed, beaten, arrested. Inside, you can breathe. The dim lighting hides you from street-level scrutiny. The music is loud enough to drown out the outside world. And for these few hours, you're not pretending. You're not hiding. You're just yourself, surrounded by other people who understand what it's like to live in two worlds simultaneously. Someone passes you a bottle of poppers. It's not the first time tonight. These little brown bottles circulate like currency here, passed from hand to hand, stranger to stranger, friend to lover. You take a hit and feel the familiar rush. But it's more than just the physical sensation. There's meaning embedded in the ritual. Every time you unscrew that cap, you're participating in an act of collective defiance. Society says you shouldn't exist, shouldn't gather, shouldn't experience pleasure on your own terms. And here you are, doing all three at once. Poppers became intertwined with gay culture for practical reasons. They enhanced sex, made physical intimacy more pleasurable, helped people relax and connect. But the symbolic weight went deeper. Here was a substance that had been invented by straight Victorian doctors, prescribed to respectable, straight, cardiac patients, and carefully controlled by the medical establishment. And gay men had taken it, repurposed it, claimed it as their own. It was a chemical middle finger to heteronormativity. The medical establishment didn't know how to respond. Poppers existed in a legal grey area, so they couldn't be banned without also denying them to legitimate heart patients. But doctors could see what was happening. Their heart medication was showing up in gay clubs, bathhouses and bedrooms across America. Some physicians wrote concerned letters to medical journals, warning about misuse and inappropriate applications. Others quietly looked the other way, recognizing that adult humans had the right to make their own choices about their bodies, even if those choices involved sniffing volatile chemicals in nightclubs. By the early 1980s, poppers had become so synonymous with gay culture that homophobes used them as shorthand for everything they feared and hated. Conservative politicians railed against the gay lifestyle, and poppers were always part of the list, right up there with promiscuity, disco music, and refusing to conform to traditional gender roles. Then the AIDS crisis hit, and everything changed. As gay men started dying in horrifying numbers, the medical establishment, the government and the media all scrambled to find explanations. Some looked at the virus, the science, the actual epidemiology. Others looked for scapegoats. Poppers became a convenient target. Maybe they weakened the immune system, some researchers suggested, despite zero evidence. Maybe they caused Kaposi's sarcoma. Maybe they were the real problem, not the virus that was actually killing people. These claims were scientifically baseless, later thoroughly debunked, but they gained traction because they fit a narrative that people wanted to believe gay men were dying because of their choices, their deviant behaviour, their refusal to live respectably. Poppers became a symbol not of liberation but of excess, of recklessness, of a community supposedly killing itself through hedonism. The gay community fought back. Activists pointed out the flawed science, the bigotry masquerading as concern, the transparent attempt to blame victims for a plague that the government was ignoring. They continued using poppers, not out of ignorance, but out of defiance. You don't get to tell us what causes our deaths, the message went, especially when you won't fund research or healthcare or anything that might actually save our lives. Poppers survived the AIDS crisis the same way the gay community survived it, through resilience, solidarity, and a stubborn refusal to let tragedy erase joy. In the darkest years, when funerals became routine and survival felt like luck, poppers remained present on dance floors and in bedrooms. Not because people didn't understand the risks, but because pleasure mattered, connection mattered, living, truly living, even in the shadow of death, mattered. That tiny brown bottle became a symbol of something larger, the insistence on experiencing joy even when the world seemed determined to punish you for existing. It wasn't naive, it wasn't reckless, it was survival. Here's where things get legally bonkers. For most of the 20th century, amyl nitrite was classified as a prescription drug in the United States and many other countries. But in the 1970s, manufacturers realized they could sidestep regulations by slightly tweaking the formula. Instead of amyl nitrite, they started selling butyl nitrite and isobutyl nitrite, which weren't technically regulated. Suddenly, poppers were legal to sell as long as they weren't marketed for human consumption. So manufacturers got creative. They labelled them as video head cleaner, leather polish, room deodorizer, or liquid incense. No one was fooled. Everyone knew exactly what they were buying, but the legal fiction allowed stores to sell them openly. You could walk into an adult bookstore, a club, or even some gas stations and buy a little bottle labelled Rush or Jungle Juice sitting right there on the counter. Law enforcement largely turned a blind eye because prosecuting someone for selling room deodorizer was absurd, even if everyone knew it was really being used to get high. This legal limbo lasted for decades and continues in many places today, creating a bizarre situation where poppers exist in plain sight, sold openly but never explicitly acknowledged for what they really are. Picture yourself as a lawyer in 1978, sitting in your office trying to make sense of the legal memo in front of you. Your client manufactures amyl nitrite for recreational use. Everyone knows this, including you, including them, including the judge who'll eventually hear this case. But they can't say that. So instead, they've asked you to help them navigate the regulations around selling room deodorizer. You read the relevant statutes. Amyl nitrite is a prescription drug. Selling it without a prescription is illegal. But your client isn't selling amyl nitrite anymore. They've switched to butyl nitrite, which is chemically similar but not specifically regulated. The FDA hasn't gotten around to classifying it yet. So technically, your client is selling an unregulated industrial chemical. That it happens to have the same effects as amyl nitrite when inhaled is, legally speaking, irrelevant. You craft a label Rush Premium Room Deodorizer. Warning contents under pressure. Flammable. Do not inhale. For room odour control only. The warning not to inhale is particularly inspired. It provides legal cover while simultaneously telling customers exactly what to do with the product. It's like putting a wet paint sign on a bench. Everyone understands it's a description, not a deterrent. This legal fiction became the foundation of the poppers industry. Manufacturers knew they were selling drugs. Retailers knew they were selling drugs. Customers knew they were buying drugs. Law enforcement knew all of this too, but couldn't do much about it. How do you prosecute someone for selling room deodorizer? You'd have to prove intent, that the manufacturer specifically intended for people to inhale their product. But the label clearly warns against inhalation. Case dismissed. The absurdity reached peak levels in the 1980s when poppers started appearing in gas station convenience stores, sitting on the counter next to beef jerky and lottery tickets. Truckers, who probably had legitimate use for some kind of odour control in their cabs, would walk up to pay for gas and see bottles of hardware or jungle juice with lightning bolt logos staring back at them. Some probably bought them thinking they actually were cleaning products. Those people had a confusing evening. Record stores got in on the action, selling poppers at the checkout counter right next to vinyl singles. The logic was sound. People buying disco records were probably going to clubs where poppers were popular. Why not make it convenient? Adult bookstores became major distribution points. which made sense given their customer base and existing comfort with selling products of questionable respectability. The government tried, occasionally, to crack down. The FDA would issue warnings, state legislatures would pass laws specifically targeting butyl nitrite, and manufacturers would simply switch to a different formulation, isobutyl nitrite, cyclohexyl nitrite, whatever wasn't specifically banned yet. It became a game of chemical whack-a-mole, with regulators always one step behind. Some prosecutors tried creative approaches. In a few cases, they charged manufacturers with selling misbranded drugs, the idea being that labeling a drug as room deodorizer constituted false advertising. These cases rarely succeeded because, again, how do you prove someone's room wasn't freshened by Rush Premium Room Deodorizer? Maybe their room smells like nail polish remover now. That's fresher, right? The legal absurdity created a strange culture around poppers. People bought them openly but spoke about them obliquely. Store clerks would ask if you wanted VHS cleaner with a knowing wink. Customers would request that room spray while making air quotes. Everyone participated in the same transparent fiction, pretending that these bottles sitting in plain sight, with suggestive names and warning labels that read like instructions, were anything other than recreational drugs. This legal limbo had consequences beyond the courtroom. Because poppers weren't regulated as drugs, they weren't subject to quality control, safety testing, or manufacturing standards. Anyone with access to basic chemistry equipment could make them, bottle them, and sell them. Some manufacturers were careful, producing relatively pure products. Others cut corners, producing bottles filled with mystery chemicals that happened to smell vaguely like poppers and might get you high, or might send you to the hospital. Consumers had no way to know which they were getting. But the legal fiction persisted, and continues to this day. You can still walk into stores in many jurisdictions and buy poppers labelled as everything except what they actually are. The law pretends they're cleaning products. Manufacturers pretend to believe that. And somewhere, a lawyer is getting paid to maintain this elaborate charade with a straight face. Walk into any adult store or club in the 1980s, and you'd see rows of tiny bottles with names that sounded like energy drinks designed by someone on hallucinogens rush. Jungle Juice, Hardware, Amsterdam, Thrust, Iron Horse, Liquid Gold. These weren't just random names, they were brands, each with its own reputation, its own loyal following, and its own mythology. Rush was the classic, the gold standard, the one everyone started with. Jungle Juice was supposedly stronger, more intense. Hardware was marketed to a specific crowd. And Amsterdam, well, that one came with European mystique. Branding mattered because poppers were technically all the same chemical, but people swore certain brands hit differently. Maybe it was placebo, maybe it was slight variations in purity or formula, or maybe it was just the power of marketing. Either way, these brands became cultural icons. People had favourites. They'd debate which one was best, which one lasted longest, which one gave you the cleanest high without the worst headache afterward. And just like with any consumer product, loyalty ran deep. You were a Rush person or a Jungle Juice person, and that said something about you, at least in your own mind. You're standing in an adult bookstore in Los Angeles in 1983, staring at a display case behind the counter that looks like a liquor store shelf, but with more lightning bolts and fewer recognizable words. There are at least 15 different brands of poppers lined up like soldiers, each in its distinctive bottle, each with its own colour scheme and logo. The clerk, a bored-looking guy with a moustache that's either ironic or completely sincere, asks what you need. Rush, you say, because that's what everyone starts with. Rush is the Coca-Cola of poppers, ubiquitous, reliable, the one that sets the standard. The bottle is yellow and black, aggressive, no nonsense. It's been around since 1970, manufactured by a company that understood branding before most drug manufacturers even knew what that meant. Rush wasn't trying to be subtle. It was called Rush. The label had a lightning bolt. The message was clear: this will hit you like a freight train and you'll enjoy it. But the clerk shakes his head. Rush is good, but Jungle Juice is better. Stronger formula. He pulls down a green bottle with jungle-themed graphics, leaves, vines. The suggestion that this product contains primal forces barely controlled by modern chemistry. You're skeptical. It's the same chemical, right? How different can it be? Very different, according to the growing mythology around popper brands. Users swore they could tell the difference, not just between brands, but between different batches of the same brand. Rush from this month hit differently than Rush from 6 months ago. Jungle Juice gave you a longer high but a worse headache. Hardware, bottle red, target demographic obvious, was smoother, cleaner, more refined. Amsterdam came in a white bottle and carried European sophistication. The suggestion that continental chemists simply made better poppers because they understood pleasure in ways Americans didn't. The truth was more complex and less romantic. Most brands were made by small manufacturers using similar formulas: butyl nitrite, isobutyl nitrite, or whatever wasn't currently banned. Variations in quality had less to do with secret recipes and more to do with manufacturing, standards, purity levels, and how long the bottle had been sitting on a shelf. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the mythology, the belief that your choice of brand said something about who you were. Rush users were traditionalists, people who appreciated the classics and didn't need flashy marketing to tell them what to buy. Jungle Juice users were risk-takers, always chasing a stronger high, willing to sacrifice tomorrow's comfort for tonight's intensity. Hardware users, well, we all knew what hardware users were into, and the brand name wasn't subtle about it. Amsterdam users were sophisticates, probably wore black turtlenecks, probably had opinions about deconstructivism. The brands evolved over time, responding to market demands and legal pressures. When one formula got banned, manufacturers would reformulate and release a new and improved version. Sometimes this meant a genuinely different chemical compound. Sometimes it meant the same stuff in a different colour bottle, with 2.0 added to the name. Customers rarely knew which was which, but it didn't stop them from having strong opinions about it. Some brands targeted specific communities. Locker Room had obvious athletic appeal. Bolt emphasized speed and intensity. Super Rush was for people who thought regular Rush was for cowards. There was even Pink Flamingo, marketed toward women, though the actual product inside was identical to every other brand. Nitrites don't care about your gender after all. The packaging just had more pink. The proliferation of brands created a weird competitive market. Manufacturers couldn't advertise on TV or in mainstream magazines, so they relied on word of mouth, club distribution, and shelf presence in adult stores. The bottle design mattered enormously. It had to communicate this will get you high, while also saying room deodorizer to maintain legal fiction. It had to stand out on a crowded shelf while not being so explicit that it attracted unwanted attention from regulators. Some brands disappeared as quickly as they appeared, victims of bad batches, legal troubles, or simply failing to distinguish themselves in a crowded market. Others persisted for decades, becoming institutions. Rush, in particular, achieved a kind of immortality. It became synonymous with poppers in the same way Kleenex became synonymous with tissues. People didn't say, pass the amyl nitrite, they said, pass the Rush, even if the bottle in question was actually Jungle Juice or hardware or some off-brand mystery chemicals someone bought at a gas station in New Jersey. The brand loyalty was real, even if the differences weren't always significant. On dance floors and in bedrooms across the world, people debated the merits of various brands with the same intensity others reserve for sports teams or political parties. It was tribal, personal, and completely absurd. But that absurdity was part of the appeal. In a world that took itself too seriously, arguing about whether Rush or Jungle Juice gave you a better 3-minute high felt delightfully trivial. It was pleasure for pleasure's sake, with no pretense of deeper meaning. Just tiny bottles with ridiculous names, lined up behind a counter, waiting to make your Friday night slightly more interesting than it would have been otherwise. Let's address the elephant, or rather, the stench, in the room. Poppers smell absolutely horrible. If you've never encountered them, imagine a mix of nail polish remover, old gym socks, gasoline, and something vaguely chemical that makes your nose hairs curl. It's sharp, acrid, and unmistakable, and yet, for people who use them, that smell becomes Pavlovian. The second that cap unscrews and the scent hits the air, your brain knows what's coming. It's like how the smell of sunscreen can transport you back to childhood summers, except instead of nostalgia, you're anticipating a head rush that'll make your ears ring. In clubs, that smell becomes part of the atmosphere. If you've spent any time in certain nightlife spaces, you've probably caught a whiff without even realising what it was. It lingers in bathrooms, on dance floors, in dark corners. Some people love it because it's tied to good memories, wild nights, peak experiences, moments of pure joy. Others find it nauseating, but no one forgets it. That smell is burned into the collective memory of anyone who's ever been near a bottle of poppers, whether they wanted to be or not. You're in a nightclub bathroom at 3 a.m., standing in front of a mirror that's seen better decades, trying to fix your hair while simultaneously wondering if you've made good life choices. The door swings open and someone walks into the stall behind you. You hear the familiar sound, a cap being unscrewed, a sharp inhale, a satisfied exhale, and then the smell hits you like a chemical slap to the face. It's impossible to describe accurately to someone who's never experienced it. Pungent doesn't quite cover it. Sharp is too mild. Like huffing paint thinner mixed with Satan's gym bag is closer, but still not quite right. There's a sweetness to it, almost, buried under layers of chemical aggression. It smells artificial in a way that makes you immediately understand that this substance was created in a lab, not found in nature. No plant produces this odour. No animal secretes it. This is pure human chemistry, molecules arranged in configurations that would make organic chemists either proud or horrified, depending on their feelings about recreational drug use. Your nose reacts before your brain can process what's happening. Your nostrils flare, then immediately try to close to protect themselves. Your eyes water slightly. If you're not expecting it, you might actually gag. But if you've been around poppers before, your reaction is completely different. That smell means something to you now. It's been associated with specific experiences, specific feelings. Pavlov figured this out with dogs and bells. The nightclub scene figured it out with poppers and chemical solvents. The smell lingers. This is one of poppers' most distinctive and problematic features. Unlike substances that get absorbed into your body and disappear, poppers evaporate into the air and stay there, announcing their presence to everyone within a 10-foot radius. You can't be discreet about using poppers, not really. The moment you crack that bottle open, everyone nearby knows what you're doing. In a club where half the people are using them, this doesn't matter. The whole venue smells like a chemistry lab that's also somehow a party. But in other contexts, it can be awkward. Try explaining to a cab driver why your coat smells like you've been marinating in industrial solvents. Try getting through airport security when your carry-on luggage reeks of nail polish remover because a bottle leaked. Try going to brunch the next morning when the smell has somehow permeated your hair, your clothes, your pores, and the waiter keeps giving you concerned looks while asking if everything's okay with your eggs Benedict. The smell also serves as a historical marker. People who came of age in the 70s and 80s have that scent imprinted on their memories, alongside disco beats and mirror balls. For them, catching a whiff of poppers isn't just recognising a chemical compound, it's time travel. Suddenly they're 25 again, dancing at the Paradise Garage, surrounded by friends who didn't survive the AIDS crisis, feeling invincible under strobe lights. The smell carries ghosts. Younger users have a different relationship with it. They didn't grow up with poppers as part of the cultural landscape, so the smell doesn't come with decades of associations. They just know it as that weird thing that happens right before everyone starts dancing harder. Some genuinely hate it and will hold their breath when someone nearby cracks a bottle. Others develop a tolerance, or even a fondness for it. Though admitting you like the smell of poppers is like admitting you enjoy the scent of gasoline, technically possible, but it raises questions. The worst part is how it combines with other club smells. Mix popper fumes with sweat, spilled beer, fog machine vapour, cigarette smoke, back when that was allowed indoors, cheap cologne, and the general funk of 200 humans in an enclosed space, and you get an olfactory experience that's either transcendent or apocalyptic depending on your perspective and sobriety level. Some venues try to manage it. Better ventilation systems, fans pointed at the dance floor, air fresheners in the bathrooms. None of it really works. The smell of poppers is stubborn. It seeps into upholstery, carpets, curtains. Clubs that have been around for decades sometimes smell faintly of poppers, even when they're empty at noon. The ghost of 1,000 weekend nights haunting the air vents. And here's the strangest part: after a while, you stop noticing it. Regular club goers become nose blind to the smell the same way people who live near highways stop hearing traffic. It becomes ambient, just another part of the sensory landscape. You only remember it's there when you bring someone new, someone who hasn't been initiated, and watch their face scrunch up in confusion and mild horror as they ask, "What is that smell?" And you have to decide whether to give them the honest answer or just say, "Oh, that's just how clubs smell," which is technically true, if incomplete. The smell of poppers is olfactory proof that some experiences can't be sanitized or made respectable. You can't bottle this stuff and make it smell like lavender or vanilla. It smells like exactly what it is: volatile chemicals in a small container, waiting to evaporate into the night air and make everything more intense for exactly 90 seconds. It's honest, in its own aggressively unpleasant way. And whether you love it or hate it, you'll never forget it. By the 1980s and 90s, poppers had become a global phenomenon, spreading from New York and San Francisco to London, Berlin, Sydney, Tokyo, and everywhere in between. And wherever electronic music and club culture took root, poppers followed. The ritual was always the same. Someone on the dance floor would pull out a small bottle, unscrew the cap, take a deep sniff and pass it to a friend. Within seconds, their eyes would widen, their pupils would dilate, and they'd throw their hands in the air, lost in the music. For those few minutes, everything felt perfect. The bass was deeper, the lights were brighter, and the crowd became a single organism moving together. It wasn't about escaping reality, it was about intensifying it, about making an already incredible moment even more euphoric. DJs knew about poppers. Some even timed their drops and build-ups to coincide with the peak of a popper rush, creating moments of collective ecstasy that people would remember for years. It became part of the choreography of nightlife, an unspoken agreement that in this space, at this time, we were all chasing the same high together. You're on a dance floor in Berlin at Berghain, though honestly it could be anywhere. London's Fabric, Tokyo's Womb, Melbourne's Revolver, a warehouse rave in Brooklyn. The specifics don't matter because the ritual is universal. It's 4 a.m. You've been dancing for hours. Your shirt is drenched with sweat. Yours, mostly, but probably some from the person who was grinding against you during the last track. Your feet hurt. Your ears are ringing. You're simultaneously exhausted and wired. That strange state where your body wants to collapse, but your mind refuses to stop. The DJ is building something. You can feel it in the way the bass line is layering. the way the hi-hats are getting faster, the way everyone around you is starting to move with more urgency. The crowd knows something's coming. You can see hands starting to rise, heads starting to tilt back, bodies preparing for whatever climax is building in the speakers. That's when someone taps your shoulder. You turn and see a friend. Or maybe not a friend. Maybe just someone you've been dancing near for the past hour, which in club logic makes you practically family. They're holding a small brown bottle. They don't need to say anything. The offer is clear. You nod. They unscrew the cap and hold it under your nose. You inhale deeply once, twice, and hand it back. The rush hits just as the track drops. It's perfect timing. Whether accidental or orchestrated, you'll never know. The bass explodes through the speakers at the exact moment your blood vessels are expanding, your heart is racing, and your brain is flooding with dopamine. The music doesn't just sound better, it becomes a physical presence, a force that's moving through you rather than around you. You're not dancing to the music anymore. You are the music. Your body is just the instrument it's playing. Around you, the ritual is repeating. That same bottle is making its way through the crowd, passed from person to person in a chain of chemical communion. Or maybe it's different bottles. There could be 10, 20 little brown containers circulating through the packed dance floor, each one spreading its 3-minute blessing to whoever needs it. You see hands raised, heads thrown back, faces caught in expressions of pure, unself-conscious joy. Everyone's peaked at slightly different moments, creating this rolling wave of euphoria that ripples through the crowd. The DJ knows. They have to know. They can see it from the booth, the sudden surge of energy, the way the crowd density changes as people push toward the speakers, the forest of hands that shoots up when the drop hits. Good DJs learn to recognize these moments, to anticipate them, to work with them. Some even encourage it, building their sets with peaks specifically designed to match the rhythm of popper use. 7-minute build-ups aren't just about musical tension, they're about giving people time to pass bottles around, to prepare, to get ready for the moment when everything converges. This ritual spread across the world with remarkable consistency. Different countries, different cultures, different languages, but the gesture is always the same. The small bottle, the unscrewing of the cap, the tilt of the head, the sharp inhale, the moment of shared transcendence. It's like a liturgy, a secular prayer that gets repeated thousands of times every weekend in clubs across the planet. In Tokyo, you see it happening in Shibuya's underground clubs, where the Japanese dedication to ritual perfection meets Western hedonism in interesting ways. The passing of the bottle becomes almost ceremonial, accompanied by small bows and murmured thanks that would seem absurdly polite in any other context. In Sao Paulo, it happens in massive raves, where 10,000 people are all moving together, and poppers are just one element in a chemical symphony that might also include everything from beer to substances that would require much longer explanations. The globalization of dance music meant the globalization of its rituals. As house and techno spread from Chicago and Detroit to Manchester and Berlin, as rave culture evolved from British fields to American warehouses to Asian megaclubs, poppers came along for the ride. They weren't always legal in these new territories. They weren't always easy to find. But people found ways. Black markets emerged. Travellers would smuggle bottles from permissive jurisdictions to restrictive ones. Local manufacturers would pop up producing their own versions with varying degrees of quality and safety. The ritual created community. There's something intimate about sharing poppers with strangers on a dance floor. You're not just giving them a chemical, you're inviting them into an experience, offering to synchronize your highs so you peak together, creating a moment of connection that's both physical and emotional. In queer spaces especially, this ritual carried extra weight. It was a gesture of trust, of belonging, of we're all in this together. Some clubs tried to ban poppers, posting signs warning that anyone caught with them would be ejected. These rules were enforced with varying degrees of seriousness, ranging from actively ignored to will kick you out if you're really obvious about it. Smart users learned discretion, taking hits in bathroom stalls, in dark corners, under the cover of raised hands and low lights. But discretion only went so far. The smell gave everything away. Other venues embraced it, understanding that fighting poppers was like fighting the tide. They installed better ventilation, stationed medical staff who knew how to handle the occasional person who'd overdone it, and accepted that this was simply part of their scene. These were the clubs that became legendary, the ones people travelled across continents to visit, the ones that understood that nightlife wasn't just about music, it was about the complete experience, including the chemical enhancements that people chose to bring to it. The ritual persists today, relatively unchanged despite decades of legal pressure, moral panics, and cultural evolution. You can still walk into clubs in any major city and see those familiar little bottles making their rounds. The brands might be different. The bottles might be plastic now instead of glass. But the gesture remains. That moment of offering, of accepting, of inhaling together and waiting for the rush that connects you to everyone else doing the same thing. All of you chasing those perfect 90 seconds when the music, the crowd, and your own euphoric brain chemistry align into something that feels, just for a moment, like exactly where you're supposed to be. Of course, nothing that feels that good comes without consequences. The most immediate and universal side effect of poppers is the headache, a pounding, throbbing skull splitter that hits anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour after use. It's caused by the same vasodilation that creates the high. Your blood vessels expand, including the ones in your brain, and when they contract back to normal, it hurts a lot. Some people get nauseous, others feel dizzy or disoriented. And if you use poppers repeatedly over a night, the next morning can be brutal, think hangover, but with an added chemical edge that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment. Then there are the rarer but more serious risks. Poppers lower your blood pressure dramatically, which means mixing them with Viagra or other erectile dysfunction medications can be dangerous, even deadly. Prolonged use can damage the retina, causing vision problems. Spilling them on your skin burns. Drinking them, yes, people have accidentally or intentionally swallowed poppers, can cause severe poisoning. And because they're unregulated and often made in sketchy labs, you never really know what you're getting. One batch might be relatively pure, the next might be cut with who knows what. It's a gamble every time you twist that cap. You wake up in your apartment, or maybe someone else's apartment. The details are fuzzy and immediately regret achieving consciousness. Your head isn't just hurting, it's staging a full-scale rebellion against your skull. There's a pulsing sensation behind your eyes that syncs perfectly with your heartbeat, which means you get to experience pain in rhythm, like the world's worst metronome. You try to remember last night, the club, the music, that bottle someone passed you around 2 a.m, then another bottle around 3, and maybe another around 4, though your memory gets hazy there. At the time, each hit felt like a great decision. This morning, your brain is filing formal complaints about your judgment. This is the popper headache, and it's legendary among regular users. It's not like a normal headache where you can pop some aspirin and carry on with your life. This is vascular, caused by your blood vessels expanding and contracting like they're doing calisthenics. The pain is sharp, localized, usually concentrated around your temples or behind your eyes. Light makes it worse. Sound makes it worse. Movement makes it worse. Existing makes it worse. You stumble to the bathroom, squinting because the overhead light feels like staring into the sun. Your reflection suggests that you had a wild time last night, though the details remain elusive. You drink water directly from the tap because finding a cup requires motor skills you don't currently possess. The water helps slightly, or maybe you're just telling yourself that. Some people swear by preventive measures. Drink water between hits. Don't use too many bottles. Space them out over the night. These are all excellent suggestions that precisely 0 people follow when they're 4 hours into a dance session and someone's offering them another hit right as the DJ drops their favourite track. Future. You can deal with the consequences. Present you as busy having transcendent experiences on a sweaty dance floor. The headache is universal, but the other side effects are more variable. Some people get dizzy spells that last hours. Others develop sensitivity to light that makes the next day functionally impossible if you work in an office with fluorescent lighting. A few unlucky souls get nauseous, spending their morning worshipping the porcelain god and swearing they'll never touch poppers again, a promise that usually lasts until the following weekend. Then there are the serious risks, the ones that don't happen to everyone but can be catastrophic when they do. Mixing poppers with Viagra is genuinely dangerous. Both cause vasodilation, both lower blood pressure, and combining them can drop your blood pressure to dangerous levels. People have died from this combination, passed out, hit their heads, never woke up. Or their blood pressure crashed so severely that their hearts couldn't compensate, leading to cardiac arrest. It's not common, but it happens often enough that every club kid should know about it. Most don't, or they think it won't happen to them, because humans are universally terrible at risk assessment when pleasure is involved. Extended use carries vision risks. Popper's maculopathy is a real condition documented in medical journals. It causes damage to the center of your retina, leading to blind spots, blurred vision, color distortion. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent. There's no way to predict who'll be affected or how severely. You're essentially playing Russian roulette with your eyesight, which seems like poor odds, but again, humans, pleasure, risk assessment. Spilling poppers on your skin is immediately regrettable. The liquid is caustic. It burns on contact, leaving red marks that take days to heal. Some people have permanent scarring from spills. And God help you if you get it anywhere sensitive, your face, your genitals, anywhere with mucous membranes. That's an emergency room visit waiting to happen, accompanied by the deeply uncomfortable experience of explaining to medical professionals exactly how you ended up with chemical burns in unfortunate locations. Then there's the nightmare scenario accidentally drinking poppers. It happens more often than you'd think, usually because someone wasn't paying attention, grabbed the wrong bottle in the dark, or was so intoxicated that their decision-making abilities had fully departed for the evening. Ingesting poppers can cause methemoglobinemia, a condition where your blood can't carry oxygen properly. Your lips turn blue, your skin goes grey. You feel like you're suffocating even though you're breathing. It requires immediate medical intervention and can be fatal if untreated. And that's assuming the bottle contained actual poppers and not one of the sketchy substitutes or contaminated batches that circulate through underground markets. Because here's the thing nobody wants to think about while they're having fun. You have no idea what's actually in that bottle. There's no FDA approval, no quality control, no standardized manufacturing process. Some producers are careful, using pure chemicals and proper procedures. Others are mixing up batches in their garage with whatever solvents they could source cheaply online. The bottle labelled Rush might contain authentic isobutyl nitrite, or it might contain industrial cleaning agents, expired chemicals, or products contaminated with dangerous impurities. Users can't tell the difference until after they've inhaled. Sometimes the only indication something's wrong is that the high feels different, or the headache is worse, or, in the worst cases, when they end up in the emergency room trying to explain what happened while doctors exchange concerned glances and start running blood tests. The unregulated nature of poppers means you're trusting complete strangers with your health every time you unscrew that cap. The guy manufacturing bottles in his warehouse in New Jersey has zero accountability. If his product hurts someone, there's no regulatory body to report to, no quality standards he's violated, no legal recourse for victims. He'll just shut down, start a new company under a different name and keep selling. But people keep using them anyway, because the high is immediate and intense, because they've used them dozens of times before without problems, because everyone else at the club is doing it, and peer pressure is a hell of a drug all by itself, because the risks feel abstract, theoretical, things that happen to other people but surely not to you, not tonight, not with your friends around, not in this moment of perfect music and perfect lighting and perfect chemical-enhanced euphoria. So you take another hit, and then another, and tomorrow morning, when your head is pounding and you're making elaborate bargains with a god you're not sure you believe in, you'll swear you're done with poppers forever. Until next weekend, when the music's right and someone offers you a bottle, and suddenly that headache seems like a very distant problem that future you can handle. Present you is busy dancing. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, poppers became a favourite target of moral crusaders, conservative politicians and anti-drug campaigners. In the midst of the AIDS crisis, some lawmakers tried to blame poppers for the epidemic, claiming they weakened the immune system or caused Kaposi's sarcoma, a cancer commonly seen in AIDS patients. These claims were scientifically baseless, but they gained traction because they fit a convenient narrative gay men were suffering because of their lifestyle choices, and poppers were Exhibit A. The reality was far more complex and far less sensational, but that didn't stop politicians from holding press conferences denouncing poppers as a scourge on society. Some countries banned them outright. Others passed laws requiring prescriptions or criminalizing possession. But enforcement was always spotty because, let's be honest, prosecuting someone for sniffing room deodorizer was never a top priority for law enforcement. The moral panic eventually faded, partly because the AIDS crisis became better understood, and partly because society moved on to new things to be outraged about. But for a while, poppers were painted as public enemy number one, a chemical villain corrupting the youth and destroying morality. Spoiler alert, they survived. Picture this: you're a Conservative congressman in 1984, facing re-election in a district that's deeply concerned about moral decay and the gay agenda. You need a talking point, something concrete you can point to as evidence that society is crumbling, and you're the only one brave enough to stop it. Enter poppers, small, portable, associated with gay culture, and conveniently existing in a legal grey area that makes them easy to demonize. You schedule a press conference. Behind you, blown up to poster size, is a photograph of various popper bottles with their provocative names: Rush, Locker Room, Hardware. You don't mention that these are legally sold as room deodorizers. You don't mention that the scientific evidence linking them to serious health problems is thin to non-existent. You definitely don't mention that the real crisis, AIDS, is spreading because of a virus, not because of volatile chemicals in small bottles. Instead, you talk about the homosexual lifestyle in tones that suggest you've never actually met a gay person, but you've certainly formed strong opinions about them. You wave a bottle of poppers around like it's a grenade. You claim without evidence that these so-called room deodorizers are destroying immune systems, causing cancer and corrupting America's youth. You call for immediate bans, stricter enforcement, criminal penalties for possession. The cameras love it. The story runs on evening news across the country. Congressman warns of deadly drug-sweeping gay community. Your poll numbers go up. Mission accomplished. The fact that you've contributed nothing to actually fighting AIDS, the actual crisis killing thousands of Americans, is conveniently ignored. This scenario played out repeatedly throughout the 80s and 90s. Politicians discovered that poppers made for excellent political theatre. They were associated with gay culture, which meant denouncing them signalled to conservative voters that you were tough on moral issues. They were easy to obtain, which meant you could claim there was a crisis that required your urgent intervention. And best of all, the people using them, mostly gay men, were a politically vulnerable group that couldn't effectively fight back. The scientific claims were laughable. Some politicians and researchers with questionable credentials claimed that poppers caused immune suppression, making users more susceptible to AIDS. These claims were never supported by rigorous studies. Real immunologists pointed out that while poppers might temporarily affect certain immune markers, there was no evidence they caused the kind of devastating immune collapse seen in AIDS patients. The virus did that, HIV did that, not a bottle of butyl nitrite from an adult bookstore. Other crusaders claimed that poppers directly caused Kaposi's sarcoma, the cancer that appeared as purple lesions on the skin of many AIDS patients. This theory gained surprising traction, despite zero scientific basis. Actual researchers pointed out that Kaposi's sarcoma was caused by HHV8, a virus, and had nothing to do with inhaling nitrites. But facts rarely win arguments when fear and prejudice are in the room. The moral panic wasn't just about health. It was about sex, about pleasure, about a community that refused to be ashamed. Poppers represented everything certain politicians hated: recreational drug use, sexual experimentation, gay culture, the whole package wrapped up in a convenient target. Banning poppers became shorthand for, we're doing something about the gay problem, without having to say that directly. Some jurisdictions did ban them. Several states passed laws making possession of poppers illegal. The FDA issued warnings and occasionally raided manufacturers. A few people actually got arrested, though usually the charges were dropped or resulted in minimal penalties. Prosecuting someone for illegal possession of room deodorizer just didn't have the same weight as prosecuting them for cocaine or heroin. The enforcement was always inconsistent and often absurd. Police would raid adult bookstores and confiscate bottles of Rush, while ignoring the stores across the street selling identical products. Manufacturers would get shut down, only to reopen a month later under a different name with slightly reformulated products. It was bureaucratic whack-a-mole, with authorities expending enormous resources for minimal impact. Meanwhile, the gay community fought back. Activists pointed out the hypocrisy alcohol killed thousands of people every year, but nobody was proposing to ban it. Tobacco caused cancer, but politicians happily accepted campaign donations from cigarette companies. The sudden concern about poppers wasn't about public health, it was about controlling gay sexuality. Organisations like ACEUP called out the scapegoating. They pointed to the actual crisis, the lack of funding for AIDS research, the government's refusal to acknowledge the epidemic, the deaths that were preventable if anyone in power actually cared. Poppers weren't killing people, AIDS was, and the politicians grandstanding about nitrites were the same ones blocking funding for treatment and prevention. The moral panic eventually exhausted itself, partly because it became clear that banning poppers accomplished nothing. People still used them. They were still available. The only difference was that they were slightly harder to find and possibly less safe, because reputable manufacturers had been replaced by even sketchier underground operations. The AIDS crisis also evolved. As scientists learned more about HIV transmission, as treatments became available, as public understanding improved, it became harder to maintain the fiction that poppers were a significant part of the problem. Even conservative politicians eventually moved on to new moral panics, video games, rap music, whatever the next convenient scapegoat was. But the damage lingered. An entire generation of gay men had been told that their pleasure, their culture, their choices were killing them. That the substances they used to enhance intimacy and joy were poisons destroying their bodies. Some believed it and stopped using poppers. Others doubled down, using them defiantly, refusing to let fear and stigma control their lives. The poppers survived, as they always do. You can't kill an industry built on legal technicalities and underground distribution with a few laws and press conferences. Politicians moved on, the gay community kept dancing, and those little brown bottles kept circulating through clubs around the world, outlasting the moral panic the same way they'd outlasted every other attempt to eliminate them, by simply being too useful, too popular, and too deeply embedded in the culture to erase. If you've ever wondered where poppers actually come from, the answer is equal parts fascinating and horrifying. Because they exist in a legal grey area, poppers aren't made by pharmaceutical companies with quality control and FDA oversight. They're made by small, often unregulated manufacturers operating out of warehouses, garages, and makeshift labs. Some are legitimate businesses trying to produce a consistent product. Others are fly-by-night operations churning out bottles as cheaply as possible, cutting corners on safety and purity. The supply chain is murky. Ingredients are sourced from chemical suppliers, mixed in large batches, bottled, labelled and shipped to distributors who sell them to adult stores, clubs and online retailers. There's no standardization, no testing and no accountability. One bottle of Rush might be relatively pure butyl nitrite. The next might be contaminated with impurities, solvents, or who knows what else. This is why experienced users are picky about brands and sources. They know that not all poppers are created equal, and trusting the wrong supplier can mean a headache at best and a trip to the hospital at worst. It's the Wild West of consumer products, and everyone's rolling the dice. Let me take you inside a warehouse in New Jersey. I'm not going to tell you where exactly, because the manufacturer I'm describing is a composite of several operations, and also because some of these people are operating in legal grey areas that could become criminal areas if the wrong prosecutor took interest. The warehouse is nondescript, the kind of industrial building you drive past without noticing. Inside it smells like chemicals, not the specific popper smell, but a more general industrial solvent scent that makes your eyes water if you're not used to it. There's a man, let's call him Mike, who's been making poppers for 20 years. He started in the late 90s when the internet made distribution easier and demand was increasing. Mike has a background in chemistry, sort of. He took a few college courses before dropping out, worked in a commercial lab for a while, and learned enough to be dangerous. Which, in the unregulated world of popper manufacturing, makes him one of the more qualified people in the industry. His setup is relatively professional as these things go. He sources his base chemicals from legitimate suppliers, companies that sell industrial chemicals with no questions asked about what you're planning to do with them. Butyl nitrite isn't a controlled substance, so ordering it doesn't raise red flags. He mixes it in large batches, 200 litres at a time, in proper ventilated conditions because even Mike, who's willing to operate in legal grey areas, isn't stupid enough to work with volatile chemicals in an enclosed space. The mixing process is fairly straightforward if you know what you're doing. The hard part is getting the concentration right. Too weak and customers complain the product doesn't work. Too strong and people get worse side effects, possibly report health problems, and suddenly Mike's dealing with reputation damage that could destroy his business. He tests each batch himself, yes, by using it, and adjusts the formula accordingly. It's not exactly rigorous scientific methodology, but it's more than some manufacturers do. Once mixed, the liquid is bottled, usually in small brown glass bottles that Mike buys in bulk from a packaging supplier. The bottles are machine-filled to ensure consistency. Then comes labelling. This is where the legal fiction happens. Mike prints labels that say room deodorizer or leather cleaner, along with warnings not to inhale and flammability notices. The brand name, let's say it's Lightning Strike, is printed in large letters with an aggressive logo. Everyone knows what these bottles are really for, but the labels maintain the pretense that they're cleaning products. From Mike's warehouse, the bottles go to distributors, middlemen who buy in bulk and sell to retail outlets, adult stores, some gas stations, online retailers, club vendors. Each layer of the supply chain takes a cut. By the time that 15 milliliter bottle reaches a customer, it costs $20 to $30, despite the raw materials costing pennies. Now contrast Mike's operation with the sketchier end of the market. There are manufacturers, calling them that is generous, who work out of garages and basements. They source the cheapest chemicals available, don't bother with concentration testing, and bottle their products in whatever containers are handy. Their quality control consists of, does it smell like poppers? Good enough. These operations produce bottles that might contain actual butyl nitrite, or might contain a mix of various nitrites, solvents, and contaminants. Some use old or degraded chemicals that have broken down into other compounds, some of which are significantly more toxic. Others cut their product to stretch it further, adding solvents that smell similar but don't have the same effects, or have worse side effects. The scariest part is the counterfeit market. Once a brand like Rush becomes popular, counterfeiters start producing fake versions. They copy the labels, use similar bottles, and sell them at slightly lower prices to distributors who either don't care or don't know they're buying fakes. These counterfeit bottles might contain anything. Some are just weak, ineffective rather than dangerous. Others are genuinely hazardous, contaminated with industrial pollutants, mixed incorrectly, stored improperly so they've chemically degraded. Users have no way to verify what they're getting. There's no lab they can send samples to for testing. There's no regulatory body ensuring safety standards. The bottle says Rush or Jungle Juice, and you either trust it or you don't. Most people trust it because they don't really have a choice. You want poppers, you buy what's available, and you hope for the best. The supply chain has evolved with the internet. In the early days, you had to go to physical stores, which limited distribution. Now anyone can set up a website, buy bottles from manufacturers, and ship them worldwide. Some of these online retailers are reputable, running legitimate businesses and sourcing from established manufacturers. Others are operating out of apartments, buying the cheapest product available, and shipping it in unmarked packages to customers who have no idea what they're actually receiving. International supply chains are even murkier. Poppers banned in one country get manufactured in another and smuggled across borders. Some countries that ban them have thriving black markets where poppers cost 5 times what they would in legal jurisdictions. Travellers become informal distributors, bringing bottles back from trips to Amsterdam or San Francisco and selling them to friends at home. The whole system operates on trust. Trust that manufacturers care enough about their reputation to produce safe products. Trust that distributors aren't knowingly selling counterfeits. Trust that the bottle you're buying at a club at 3 a.m. contains what it claims to contain. Sometimes that trust is warranted, sometimes it absolutely isn't, and there's no way to know which until you've already opened the bottle and inhaled. Mike, our New Jersey manufacturer, has been in business for 2 decades because he maintains quality standards and reputation. He knows that one bad batch could destroy everything he's built. But he's also aware that dozens of other operations don't care about reputation, because they can just shut down and reopen under a new name. The race to the bottom is real, and it's making the entire industry more dangerous. There have been calls for regulation, for treating poppers like what they actually are, recreational drugs that should be manufactured under safety standards and tested for purity. But that would require admitting they're drugs, which would mean potentially making them illegal, which would just push everything further underground. It's a regulatory catch-22 that's been unsolved for decades. So the industry continues operating in the shadows, a mix of careful manufacturers trying to do it right and opportunistic operations cutting every corner to maximize profit. And users keep buying, keep hoping they're getting the real thing, keep assuming that the bottle they're inhaling from was made by someone who cares whether they wake up tomorrow morning with just a headache or something considerably worse. When the internet exploded in the late 1990s and early 2000s, poppers went digital. Suddenly, you didn't need to walk into a sketchy adult store and make awkward eye contact with a cashier. You could order them online discreetly from the comfort of your home. Websites popped up, pun intended, selling every brand imaginable, often with glowing reviews and promises of the strongest formula ever. E-commerce made poppers more accessible than ever, but it also made the supply chain even murkier. Who were these websites? Where were the products coming from? No one knew, and no one really cared as long as the bottle showed up. Then came the Amazon problem. For years, sellers listed poppers on Amazon disguised as leather cleaners or VHS head cleaners, knowing full well what buyers were actually using them for. Amazon's algorithms didn't catch on or didn't care until media outlets started reporting on it. Eventually, the platform cracked down, pulling listings and banning sellers. But the game of whack-a-mole continues. Poppers still circulate online, sold through independent websites, social media, and encrypted messaging apps. The internet didn't just make poppers easier to buy, it made them nearly impossible to regulate. You're sitting at your computer in 2003, possibly still using dial-up internet because broadband isn't universal yet. You want to buy poppers, but the nearest adult store is 30 minutes away, and you really don't want to be the person browsing the novelty item section while pretending to be interested in the completely innocent products surrounding them. So you do what people in the early 2000s do when they need something mildly illicit, you Google it. The search results are immediate and plentiful. Buy poppers online. Rush delivered discreetly to your door. Best prices on jungle juice. There are dozens of websites, each one designed with that particular early internet aesthetic. Garish colours, aggressive fonts, too many exclamation points. The sites all look vaguely similar, like they were built from the same template by someone who learned HTML in 1998 and never updated their skills. You click on one, it promises guaranteed delivery, highest quality products, and discreet packaging. There's a selection of brands with product photos that may or may not be accurate. Prices range from reasonable to absurd. Customer reviews claim everything from "change my life" to "arrived on time, no complaints," which tells you absolutely nothing useful about whether the product inside the bottle is safe, effective, or actual poppers versus industrial solvent with a rush label slapped on it. But you're committed now. You add a few bottles to your cart, might as well stock up, shipping isn't cheap, and proceed to checkout. The payment processing goes through some company with a name like Novelty Products International LLC. Your credit card statement will later show a charge from an entity that sounds nothing like poppers, maintaining that thin veneer of deniability. 3 to 7 business days later, a package arrives. It's plain, unmarked, giving no indication of what's inside. You open it and find your bottles, wrapped in bubble wrap, accompanied by absolutely no information about the product, no instructions, no safety warnings beyond the ones printed on the labels that tell you not to do the exact thing you're planning to do with them. This was the first wave of online popper sales, and it democratized access in ways that physical retail never could. People in rural areas where adult stores didn't exist could now get poppers. People too anxious or closeted to buy them in person could order from the privacy of their homes. International customers could import them from countries where they were legal to places where they weren't, though this came with customs risks that made for some extremely awkward conversations if packages got flagged. The websites multiplied exponentially. Some were legitimate operations run by established manufacturers or distributors. Others were fly-by-night scams that took your money and sent you nothing, or sent you bottles filled with who knows what. Customer service was non-existent. If you got scammed, you had no recourse. You couldn't exactly call your credit card company and dispute the charge for illegal party drugs you bought under the guise of leather cleaner. Forums and early social media helped somewhat. Users would share reliable sources, warn about scam sites, and recommend brands. But this information was scattered, often contradictory, and frequently outdated. A site that was trustworthy in 2005 might be taken over by new owners in 2007, who didn't maintain the same standards. Then, Amazon entered the picture, inadvertently. Amazon's marketplace model allowed third-party sellers to list products with minimal oversight, and sellers quickly figured out that if you listed poppers as leather cleaner, or VHS head cleaner, or room odorizer, Amazon's automated systems wouldn't flag them. The algorithms look for keywords associated with drugs, cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine, but nobody had programmed them to flag premium leather conditioning formula with advanced cleaning action. By the early 2010s, you could find poppers on Amazon Prime, 2-day shipping, customer reviews, the whole Amazon experience but for nitrite inhalants. Some listings were subtle, using code words that regular customers understood but automated systems missed. Others were brazen, with product photos showing the distinctive bottles and brand names everyone recognized. The reviews were hilarious and telling. 5 stars, great leather cleaner, really opened up the pores of my leather jacket. 1 star, terrible for cleaning leather, left stains, would not recommend for its intended purpose. Both reviewers knew exactly what they were talking about, and it wasn't leather care. This couldn't last, and it didn't. Media outlets eventually caught on and published exposés about Amazon selling poppers. You can buy this dangerous drug on Amazon Prime. The headlines shrieked, accompanied by shocked paragraphs about how easy it was to find them. Amazon, facing PR pressure and potential regulatory scrutiny, started purging listings. Sellers got banned, products got delisted. The popper section of Amazon's marketplace disappeared almost overnight. But the sellers just moved. They set up independent e-commerce sites, often using the same photos and descriptions they'd used on Amazon. They moved to eBay until eBay cracked down too. They started selling through Instagram and Facebook until those platforms also banned them. Each crackdown just pushed sales to the next platform or back to independent websites. Encrypted apps became popular for distribution. Telegram channels would advertise poppers with product photos and ordering instructions. Transactions happened through Venmo or cryptocurrency. Products shipped in unmarked packages from residential addresses to avoid detection. The whole supply chain went underground while simultaneously being completely visible to anyone who knew where to look. The internet also globalized the market in unprecedented ways. A manufacturer in the Netherlands could ship to customers in Australia. Someone in London could order from a supplier in San Francisco. International postal services became unwitting participants in a worldwide distribution network for substances that were illegal in many of the countries they were being shipped to. Customs agencies tried to stop it, but they were overwhelmed. How do you identify poppers in a package labelled cleaning supplies without opening every single parcel, which would grind international mail to a halt? Some countries implemented stricter rules about importing chemicals, but enforcing those rules proved nearly impossible. The online explosion also created new problems with quality and safety. In physical stores, there was at least some accountability. Stores that sold bad products got reputations and lost customers. Online, a scammer could set up a website, sell contaminated or fake products, disappear when complaints started rolling in, and set up a new site under a different name next week. The barrier to entry was so low that anyone with basic web skills could become a popper distributor, whether or not they had any idea what they were selling. User forums tried to maintain lists of trusted vendors, but these lists were constantly outdated. A vendor who was reliable 6 months ago might have sold their business to someone else, or changed suppliers, or just stopped caring about quality. The only way to know was to order and hope. Some online retailers actually improved transparency, ironically. A few sites started including batch numbers, manufacturing dates, and certificates of analysis from third-party labs. They were trying to differentiate themselves in a crowded market by being the safe option. Whether their documentation was legitimate was another question entirely, but at least they were acknowledging that quality mattered. The internet transformed poppers from a niche club drug you had to seek out into a commodity available anywhere with a few clicks. It made them more accessible, more affordable, and considerably more dangerous because the already murky supply chain became completely opaque. You could order poppers at 3 a.m. from your phone while lying in bed, and they'd arrive in 2 days. Whether what arrived was safe to use was anybody's guess. But convenience has always trumped caution, and the online popper market continues thriving in its strange digital limbo, one step ahead of regulators, one click away from anyone curious enough to search for them. You might think poppers would have faded into obscurity by now, relics of a bygone era of disco balls and leather bars. But you'd be wrong. In the 2010s and 2020s, poppers experienced a full-blown renaissance, embraced by a new generation of clubgoers who'd never heard of Studio 54 but still understood the appeal of a 3-minute head rush on a crowded dance floor. Modern electronic music, techno, house, trance, pairs perfectly with poppers. The repetitive beats, the hypnotic rhythms, the slow build-ups and explosive drops, all of it becomes more intense, more visceral, more transcendent when you're riding a wave of vasodilation and dopamine. Festivals like Berghain in Berlin, Fabric in London, and underground raves in warehouses from Los Angeles to Melbourne are filled with people passing around little bottles, continuing a tradition that's now decades old. Social media has also played a role. TikTok, Instagram and Reddit are filled with references to poppers, memes about the headaches, guides on which brands to try, and debates about whether they're still cool or hopelessly dated. The verdict? They're both, and that's part of the charm. Poppers are simultaneously retro and timeless, a bridge between generations of people who just want to feel good, even if it's only for a few minutes. You're 23 years old. You weren't born when disco died. AIDS is something you learned about in health class, not something that decimated your community. Studio 54 exists only in documentary footage that looks impossibly glamorous and impossibly dated simultaneously. You have no direct connection to poppers' history, no inherited knowledge about which brands are trustworthy, or what the rituals mean. You just know that everyone at the warehouse party last month was passing around these little bottles, and whatever was in them made the music hit different. So here you are at another party, this one in an abandoned factory in an industrial part of town that's being slowly gentrified but hasn't quite gotten there yet. The space is raw, concrete floors, exposed beams, minimal lighting beyond what the organisers brought in. The sound system is serious, the kind that cost more than your car, and the DJ is playing a techno set that's been building for an hour with no peak in sight. Just layers and layers of percussion, synthesizers, and bass frequencies you feel in your chest cavity rather than hear. Someone taps your shoulder. You turn and see a friend, using that term loosely since you met them 2 hours ago, but have been dancing in the same vicinity since, holding out a small bottle. The label says something about leather cleaner, but you're not stupid. You've seen these before, scrolled past them on Reddit threads, watched TikToks that referenced them in oblique ways that avoided platform censorship. You take the bottle, unscrew it, inhale. The rush is immediate and disorienting in the best possible way. Suddenly the techno makes perfect sense. The repetitive beats aren't boring, they're hypnotic, cyclical, mimicking your heartbeat, which is now racing to keep up with your dilated blood vessels. The bass drop that's been building for the past 20 minutes finally hits, and you're not just hearing it, you're inside it. You are the drop. Everyone around you is moving as one organism, and you're all riding the same wave of chemical and musical euphoria. This is the modern popper experience, and it's remarkably similar to what happened in clubs 40 years ago. The technology has changed. You're probably going to post about this on Instagram tomorrow, filtered and hashtagged and carefully curated to suggest you had a wild time without being so explicit that you violate community guidelines. But the core experience, the ritual of passing bottles on a dance floor and peaking together to music that's designed to be overwhelming, that's timeless. Modern club culture rediscovered poppers partly through cultural archaeology. Older clubbers, the ones who survived the 90s and 2000s, never stopped using them. They passed the tradition to younger dancers, either directly or through example. Curious 20-year-olds saw older ravers using poppers and asked questions. The knowledge transferred one generation to the next in bathrooms and smoking areas and after-parties, where people were honest about what they were doing and why. Electronic music's evolution also helped. As house and techno became more sophisticated, more layered, more focused on creating sustained states of euphoria through sound, poppers slotted right back into the experience. The music was designed for altered states, whether achieved through dancing for 8 hours straight, through chemical enhancement, or both. DJs understood this. The good ones could read the room, could sense when the crowd needed building up or bringing down, could time their peaks to match the collective energy. Social media played a complicated role. Platforms officially banned drug content, which meant explicit discussions of poppers were prohibited. But users got creative. They posted memes featuring cartoon characters holding small bottles, captioned with inside jokes that only people who knew would understand. They shared room deodorizer reviews that were clearly about getting high. They created Reddit threads with careful language, discussing brands of leather cleaner with detailed reviews of cleaning effectiveness that fooled no one. TikTok spawned a whole subgenre of popper content, though it existed in that grey area where everyone knew what was being discussed, but plausible deniability was maintained. Videos would show someone's face going red while a friend laughed in the background. Captions referenced the world's worst room spray, or included vague warnings about headaches. The algorithm learned what these videos were really about, and started suggesting them to users interested in nightlife, club culture, and LGBTQ+ content. This created a feedback loop. Younger people saw these references, got curious, Googled around, and discovered the whole history and current availability of poppers. What had been underground knowledge passed peer-to-peer became something you could learn about from internet rabbit holes. The mystique diminished, but accessibility increased. Festivals became major sites of popper use. Multi-day events like Burning Man, Coachella's unofficial after-parties, underground desert raves, European techno festivals, anywhere thousands of people gathered to dance for extended periods. Poppers circulated. Security might confiscate MDMA or cocaine, but they rarely bothered with poppers. They were too common, too legally ambiguous, and frankly too low priority compared to harder drugs. The aesthetic also experienced a revival. Neon, mesh, platform shoes, all the visual markers of 80s and 90s club culture came back into fashion. Carried on a wave of nostalgia for an era most of the people wearing it didn't actually experience. Poppers came along for the ride, another retro element that felt simultaneously vintage and immediate. What's interesting is how little the experience has changed despite all the technological and cultural evolution. You can put someone from Studio 54 next to someone from a modern Berlin techno club, and they'd recognize each other's experience immediately. The music sounds different, the setting looks different, But that moment when the bottle gets passed, when you inhale and wait for the rush, when the music peaks and your whole body responds, that's identical across decades. The modern renaissance of poppers isn't about rediscovering something lost. It's about a new generation finding what previous generations already knew, that sometimes you want to feel more, intensely and immediately, and poppers provide that. The headache tomorrow is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, with the bass rattling your ribcage and strangers becoming friends, and the music building toward a peak that feels like it might actually achieve transcendence. Tonight, you understand exactly why these little bottles have survived every moral panic, every legal crackdown, every attempt to relegate them to history. Because they work. And pleasure, it turns out, is remarkably resilient. Let's get nerdy for a moment. The euphoria poppers produce isn't magic, it's chemistry. Specifically the interaction between nitrites and your central nervous system. When you inhale poppers, the nitrite molecules are rapidly absorbed through the mucous membranes in your nose and lungs. They enter your bloodstream and almost immediately cause the smooth muscles in your blood vessels to relax. This relaxation leads to vasodilation, your vessels widen, blood pressure drops, and blood flow increases throughout your body. The sudden rush of oxygenated blood to your brain triggers a release of neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine, which is responsible for feelings of pleasure and reward. At the same time, your heart rate increases to compensate for the drop in blood pressure, giving you that pounding adrenaline-fueled sensation. Your skin flushes red as capillaries expand. You feel warm, tingly, and hyper-aware of your surroundings. It's a full-body experience that peaks within 30 seconds and fades within 5 minutes. But here's the thing, your brain loves novelty and intensity, which is why that first hit always feels the strongest. Repeated use leads to tolerance, meaning you need more to achieve the same effect, and because the high is so short, it's easy to chase it, using again and again throughout a night. That's where the cycle begins, and where the risks start piling up. You're sitting in a neurochemistry lecture, metaphorically, because explaining why poppers feel good requires understanding what's happening in your brain and cardiovascular system at a molecular level. Don't worry, I'll make this less boring than your actual chemistry classes, mostly by acknowledging that we're discussing why a party drug works instead of pretending this is pure academic inquiry. Start with the molecule itself, alkyl nitrites, whether amyl, butyl or isobutyl, are relatively simple organic compounds. They consist of a short carbon chain attached to a nitrite group, RONO, if you remember your chemistry notation, and if you don't, it doesn't matter. What makes them special is how quickly they break down in your body and what they break down into. When you inhale poppers, those nitrite molecules are absorbed almost instantly through the mucous membranes in your respiratory tract. Your lungs are incredibly efficient at gas exchange. That's their entire job. So within seconds, these molecules are in your bloodstream. Once there, they encounter enzymes that convert them into nitric oxide, N, which is where the magic happens. Nitric oxide is a signaling molecule, something your body produces naturally for various purposes. One of its primary functions is regulating blood vessel dilation. When NO levels increase suddenly, it causes the smooth muscle cells in your blood vessel walls to relax. These cells are normally somewhat contracted, maintaining your blood pressure. When they relax, the vessels expand. More space for blood to flow means less pressure. Basic hydraulics. This vasodilation happens everywhere simultaneously. Your brain gets more blood flow. Your heart gets more blood flow. Your skin, your organs, your extremities, everything gets a sudden surge of oxygenated blood. Your brain, receiving this extra oxygen and nutrients, responds by releasing dopamine, your body's primary pleasure neurotransmitter. Dopamine is what makes food taste good, sex feel amazing, and drugs addictive. It's your brain's way of saying, yes, more of that please. But dopamine isn't acting alone. The sudden drop in blood pressure triggers your autonomic nervous system, which doesn't particularly like sudden changes and responds by releasing norepinephrine, basically adrenaline's cousin. This is why your heart starts pounding. It's trying to compensate for the pressure drop by pumping faster and harder. The combination of increased dopamine and increased adrenaline creates that characteristic rush pleasure plus excitement plus physical intensity. Your skin flushes because capillaries near the surface are expanding. Blood rushes to areas that normally don't get quite so much attention. This is why people describe feeling warm or tingly. You're not imagining it. There's literally more blood flowing through tissues that are usually operating on lower circulation. Now here's where it gets interesting from a neuroscience perspective. The rush of blood to your brain doesn't just deliver oxygen and nutrients. It also temporarily affects how your brain processes sensory information. Everything becomes slightly more intense. Music sounds clearer, lights seem brighter, physical sensations feel heightened. This isn't because the music actually changed or the lights got turned up. It's because your brain is processing these inputs with enhanced resources and altered neurochemistry. The effect peaks fast because your body is very good at homeostasis, maintaining equilibrium. Your blood vessels don't stay dilated indefinitely. Within minutes, regulatory systems kick in. Enzymes break down the nitric oxide. Your smooth muscle cells begin contracting again. Blood pressure starts normalizing. Your heart rate slows. The dopamine surge subsides as receptors either absorb or break down the excess neurotransmitter. This is why the high is so brief. You're not building up levels of a substance in your bloodstream like you would with alcohol or MDMA. You're causing a temporary disruption to normal cardiovascular function, and your body corrects it quickly. By 5 minutes after inhalation, most of the effects have resolved. Your blood pressure is back to baseline. Your heart rate is normal. You're basically back where you started, except maybe with a headache forming. The headache happens because of rebound vasoconstriction. Your blood vessels expanded suddenly, then contracted back to normal. That contraction, especially in the vessels around your brain, triggers pain receptors. It's similar to the mechanism behind some types of migraines, except you deliberately induced it by sniffing chemicals for fun. The medical term is vasodilator-induced headache, and it is predictable, common, and unavoidable if you use poppers enough. Tolerance develops because your body adapts. Use poppers frequently and your cardiovascular system gets better at compensating for the sudden vasodilation. Your blood vessels don't dilate as much. Your blood pressure doesn't drop as severely. The dopamine release diminishes because receptors become less sensitive with repeated stimulation. This is basic neurobiology. Your brain adjusts to frequent stimuli by reducing its response to them. It's why coffee stops feeling as strong after you've been drinking it daily for a month. The brief duration also creates psychological dependency through intermittent reinforcement, which is one of the most powerful patterns for creating habitual behavior. Slot machines work on this principle: unpredictable rewards, brief excitement, quick resolution. Poppers do the same thing. The high comes fast, feels great, and ends quickly, leaving you wanting more. It's not physical addiction. You won't go through withdrawal if you stop using poppers. But the psychological pull can be strong, especially in environments like clubs where the cues to use, music, crowd, availability, are all present. The real risk comes from chasing that initial intensity. The first time you try poppers is usually the strongest experience you'll have with them. Every subsequent use is your brain comparing the current high to that first peak, and it never quite measures up. So you use more frequently, you try different brands hoping they'll recapture that original feeling. This isn't unusual. It's how most drug experiences work. But with poppers, the brevity of the high means you can go through this cycle multiple times in a single night, each time hoping the next hit will be the one that feels like the first. It never is. But that doesn't stop people from trying. Understanding the science doesn't make poppers less appealing, but it does make the experience less mystical. There's no magic, no spiritual dimension, just molecules interacting with receptors in very predictable ways. Your blood vessels expand, your brain gets flooded with oxygen and dopamine, your heart races to compensate, and then it all resolves within minutes, leaving you slightly dizzy, possibly with a headache, and definitely considering whether you want to do it again. The science says you probably will. The dopamine saw to that. Believe it or not, poppers are still used medically, though not in the way you'd expect. Amyl nitrite has largely been replaced by more modern medications for treating angina, but it's still kept in some emergency medical kits as an antidote for cyanide poisoning. Yes, really. When someone is exposed to cyanide, whether through industrial accidents, fires, or chemical warfare, amyl nitrite can be administered to help convert hemoglobin in the blood to methemoglobin, which binds to cyanide and renders it less toxic. It's a stopgap measure used alongside other treatments, but it works. So in a bizarre twist, the same chemical that gets people high on dance floors can also save lives in the emergency rooms. Some researchers have also explored other medical applications. Studies have looked at whether nitrites could be used to treat conditions like heart failure, pulmonary hypertension, or even certain infections. The results have been mixed, but the fact that scientists are still investigating poppers' medical potential shows just how complex and versatile these chemicals are. They're not just party drugs, they're pharmacological Swiss Army knives, dangerous in the wrong hands, life-saving in the right ones, and endlessly fascinating no matter how you look at them. Picture this. You're an emergency room doctor in a major city hospital. It's 3 a.m., always 3 a.m., the witching hour of emergency medicine when the strangest cases arrive. Paramedics rush in with a patient on a gurney. He's cyanotic, skin grey-blue, lips dark, struggling to breathe despite the oxygen mask. Industrial accident, the paramedic reports. Cyanide exposure from a metal plating facility. We've got maybe minutes. You immediately call for the cyanide antidote kit, which exists in hospitals specifically for these rare but deadly emergencies. Inside that kit, among other medications, is amyl nitrite. Yes, the same substance that's getting people high in clubs across town is about to save this man's life. The mechanism is elegant in its simplicity. Cyanide kills by binding to an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase in your cell's mitochondria, essentially shutting down cellular respiration. Your cells can't use oxygen anymore, which is why cyanide poisoning causes that distinctive blue-grey colour. You're essentially suffocating at the cellular level even though your lungs are working fine. Amyl nitrite counteracts this by converting some of your normal hemoglobin into methemoglobin. Methemoglobin can't carry oxygen efficiently, which sounds bad, but here's the clever part. Cyanide preferentially binds to methemoglobin instead of cytochrome C oxidase. You're essentially creating a decoy target, sacrificing some oxygen-carrying capacity in your blood to protect your cell's ability to actually use oxygen. It's a trade-off, but when the alternative is death within minutes, it's a very good trade. You crack open an amyl nitrite ampule, the exact same kind that Victorian doctors used for angina patients, that gay men in the 70s used for very different purposes. The patient inhales. Within seconds, his methemoglobin levels start rising. It's buying time for the other antidotes to work, sodium nitrite administered intravenously, then sodium thiosulfate, which helps the body eliminate cyanide. The combination saves his life. 3 hours later, he's stable, and you're filling out paperwork that includes the phrase amyl nitrite, administered for cyanide exposure, which probably makes you one of the few people to use poppers for their original medical purpose this decade. This isn't theoretical. amyl nitrite remains part of standard cyanide antidote protocols in many countries. Firefighters carry it because structure fires can produce cyanide from burning plastics and synthetic materials. Hazmat teams have it on hand for industrial chemical exposures. Military medics stock it as a countermeasure for chemical warfare agents. It's old technology, largely superseded by newer antidotes like hydroxycobalamin, but its proven, effective, and fast-acting crucial qualities in an emergency. The medical establishment's relationship with poppers has always been complicated by their recreational use. Researchers who want to study amyl nitrite's medical applications have to navigate the drug's reputation, the stigma associated with it, and the practical challenges of conducting studies on a substance primarily known for getting people high at clubs. But some researchers persist because nitrites have genuinely interesting pharmacology. Studies have explored using them for heart failure, where controlled vasodilation might help reduce the heart's workload. The results have been mixed, the drugs work, but they're not clearly better than existing treatments, and the rapid tolerance that develops with regular use makes them problematic for chronic conditions. Pulmonary hypertension research has looked at nitrites as potential treatments. The disease involves high blood pressure in the arteries supplying the lungs, which can lead to heart failure. Vasodilators help by reducing that pressure, and nitrites are powerful vasodilators. But again, the brief duration of action and rapid tolerance development make them impractical compared to longer-acting medications specifically designed for this purpose. There's even been research into antimicrobial effects. Some studies have suggested that nitric oxide, which nitrites convert into, has antibacterial and antiviral properties. Could poppers, or related compounds, be developed into antimicrobial agents? The research is preliminary, often contradictory, and nowhere near producing actual treatments. But it's a reminder that even substances primarily used recreationally can have legitimate medical potential. The irony isn't lost on anyone familiar with poppers' history. Here's a substance that started as Victorian heart medicine, became synonymous with gay nightlife and hedonism, got stigmatized and banned in various places, and now sits in emergency medical kits as a life-saving antidote. The same bottle, literally, sometimes the same formulation, can be found in a hospital emergency department and a nightclub bathroom, serving completely different purposes, both of them legitimate in their own contexts. This pharmaceutical versatility highlights something important about drugs in general: they don't have inherent purposes. Morphine is both a life-saving painkiller and a street drug. Amphetamines treat ADHD and are also meth. Alcohol is a social lubricant, an antiseptic, and a poison depending on dose and context. Poppers saved lives in the 19th century, saved different lives in the 20th century, cyanide poisoning, and enhanced pleasure in ways that have kept them relevant across 15 decades. The medical community's attitude toward poppers remains conflicted. Some doctors acknowledge their legitimate uses, both the emergency applications and the harm reduction argument that people are going to use them anyway, so we might as well ensure they're using them as safely as possible. Others focus on the health risks, the lack of regulation, the potential for abuse. Both perspectives are valid, and both stem from the same complicated reality. Poppers are genuinely useful chemicals that exist in multiple worlds simultaneously: medical, recreational, legal, illegal, life-saving, potentially harmful, and refusing to acknowledge any of those dimensions doesn't make them go away. So amyl nitrite sits in ambulances next to cardiac medications and trauma supplies, ready to save someone from cyanide poisoning, and variations of the same chemical sit in adult stores and online shopping carts, ready to make someone's Saturday night more interesting. It's the same molecule serving wildly different purposes, which is either ironic or perfectly sensible depending on how you think about it. Chemistry doesn't judge. Molecules don't care whether they're being used to counteract industrial poisoning or enhance a disco beat. They just do what they do: dilate blood vessels, trigger dopamine release, and remind us that the line between medicine and recreation has always been thinner and more complicated than we'd like to pretend. So, here we are, at the end of this strange journey through chemistry, history, and human stubbornness. We started in 1867 with a French chemist who just wanted to understand nitrites, and we've ended up in the 21st century where those same chemicals are still being passed around dance floors worldwide, wrapped in legal fictions and controversy, somehow having survived everything the world threw at them. Think about that for a second. Poppers have outlasted the Victorian era that created them. They survived 2 world wars, the sexual revolution, the AIDS crisis, the war on drugs, countless moral panics, and the internet age. They've been blamed for diseases they didn't cause, banned in countries where they're still widely available, and sold as everything from heart medicine to room deodorizer to leather cleaner. They've been demonized by politicians, celebrated by queer communities, studied by scientists who couldn't get funding, and used by millions of people who just wanted a few minutes of intensified pleasure on a Saturday night. And through all of it, through the deaths, the legal battles, the cultural shifts, the technological revolutions, those little brown bottles just kept circulating. Because here's what we've learned: people are remarkably consistent about pursuing pleasure, even when that pleasure comes with risks, stigma, and headaches that make you question your entire existence the next morning. Poppers aren't respectable. They never have been, and they probably never will be. They smell terrible. They give you skull-crushing headaches. They're sold under absurd labels that fool absolutely nobody. And they exist in a legal twilight zone that makes both regulators and users uncomfortable. They're associated with sexuality that makes conservative people nervous, with hedonism that challenges respectability politics, and with communities that have historically been marginalized and stigmatized. But they're also a reminder that pleasure matters, that autonomy matters, that the human drive to feel good, to intensify experience, to share moments of euphoria with strangers on a dance floor, that drive is fundamental, powerful, and remarkably difficult to suppress no matter how hard society tries. The story of poppers is really a story about us, about how we navigate the tension between safety and freedom, between individual choice and collective responsibility, between the desire for pleasure and the fear of its consequences. It's about how communities create meaning around substances, how they develop rituals and knowledge systems in the absence of official support, and how they persist in pursuing joy even when that pursuit is criminalized, stigmatized, or dismissed. It's also a story about failure, the failure of prohibition to eliminate substances people want, the failure of moral panics to change behavior through shame, the failure of regulatory systems to deal with products that don't fit neat categories, and the failure of public health to provide adequate information and harm reduction for substances that exist outside legal frameworks. From Victorian doctors trying to save heart patients, to gay men dancing through the AIDS crisis, to Gen Z kids learning about poppers from TikTok, the thread has remained remarkably consistent. Here's a chemical that does a thing people like, and no amount of laws, stigma, or social pressure has made it go away. The poppers you can buy today aren't that different from the poppers available 50 years ago, or 100 years ago. The chemistry is basically the same, the effects are the same, the headaches are the same. What's changed is the culture around them, the legal frameworks trying to regulate them, and the ways people learn about and share their experiences with them. Maybe in another 100 years, poppers will finally fade away, replaced by something newer, safer, better. Or maybe they'll still be here, still being sold as room deodorizer, still circulating through clubs, still sparking the same debates about pleasure, risk and freedom that they've been sparking since Queen Victoria was on the throne. Either way, their story tells us something important about the human condition. We're pleasure-seeking creatures who don't respond well to being told what we can and cannot do with our own bodies. We're creative problem solvers who find ways around restrictions when those restrictions feel arbitrary or unjust. And we're community builders who share knowledge, develop rituals, and take care of each other even when official systems fail us. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in a world where you can order poppers with 2-day shipping while they're simultaneously classified as cleaning products, where they're simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, legal and illegal, celebrated and stigmatized, maybe spare a thought for that Victorian chemist who started all this. He was just trying to help people with chest pain. He had no idea his discovery would end up soundtracking disco nights, surviving AIDS, launching 1,000 TikTok videos, and generally refusing to disappear despite everyone's best efforts to make it respectable, eliminate it, or pretend it doesn't exist. From heart medication to nightclub staple, from medical miracle to moral panic, from Victorian propriety to queer liberation, poppers has been all of these things and more. They're a tiny bottle containing a complicated history, a symbol of everything society fears and everything humans persistently pursue anyway. They're messy, controversial, impossible to categorize, stubbornly persistent and utterly human, just like the rest of us. Sweet dreams. Try not to think about the smell.